Welcome to the Compliance Plus Ethics Equals Integrity podcast, featuring BerryDunn Healthcare Practice Group professionals and our expert guest, discussing insights into contemporary as well as perennial healthcare regulatory, revenue integrity, general compliance, and risk management topics. My name is Robyn Hoffmann. I'm a Senior Compliance and Credentialing Manager in BerryDunn's Healthcare Practice Group. I am honored to be joined for this episode by Regina Alexander, a principal at BerryDunn who established this podcast series, and by our very special guest, Anna Langerveld, PhD. Dr. Langerveld is the founder of Genemarkers, LLC, and she serves as its president and chief executive officer. Genemarkers, which is a specialized independent laboratory based in Kalamazoo, Michigan, has been a valued BerryDunn client since 2021. Before we get into our discussion, a quick disclaimer. The content we discuss in this podcast is based on our professional experience advising healthcare providers, facilities, and other organizations that engage BerryDunn for compliance and other services. While we may reference specific government programs, Medicare and Medicaid policies, and regulatory guidance, we do not speak for any government agency or contractor, nor do we have the authority to do so. Nothing in this podcast should be considered legal advice. Anyone seeking legal advice on the subjects we discuss should consult their own attorney. We are so honored to have Dr. Anna Langerveld with us today for our discussion about promoting revenue integrity and a culture of compliance within independent laboratories. Dr. Langerveld is the founder of Genemarkers, LLC, and she serves as its president and CEO. Genemarkers is a specialized independent lab based in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which offers both clinical testing and research services. Genemarkers' clinical testing services focus on pharmacogenomics, commonly known as PGX testing. While Genemarkers has been working in the pharmacogenomics testing discipline for quite some time, as did many independent laboratories during the height of the pandemic, they pivoted to adding capacity to support the high volume of demand for COVID testing in their community, and kudos for doing so. Revenue integrity, compliance, and quality are at the forefront of Genemarkers' culture and its business plan. Welcome to our podcast, Anna. We are thrilled to have you. Before we get into our discussion, could you share a bit more with our listeners about your background and what drew you to the field of laboratory medicine and research?
Thank you, Robyn. And first, I'd like to start off by thanking you all for having me on this podcast. And I appreciate greatly you thinking of Genemarkers when you think of compliance. So, like Regina, I also started out on the lab bench. I earned my PhD in neuroscience from Tulane University, and worked for many years on the bench doing cell and molecular biology methods. In 2008, I started Genemarkers, and the company was started as a research service organization. And we did a lot of work for providing genomic biomarker discovery type of work. And a couple of years later, in 2014, I decided to diversify the company's service offerings. We're using a lot of the same methodologies and technologies that are used in clinical laboratory medicine. So it seemed, at the time, it was a natural, more of an organic progression to diversify our services into clinical laboratory medicine.
Thanks so much, Anna. That's greatly appreciated. As you know, laboratory services have been a long-standing area of interest for the Office of the Inspector General. The OIG first published a model compliance plan for the clinical laboratory industry in March of 1997, and it issued a supplemental guidance in August of 1998. As we said earlier, pharmacogenomics is a highly specialized niche within the independent laboratory service industry that many of our listeners may not be familiar with. So, to use Regina's term, what is the simplest way to have us not lose the, I love this term, non-laboratorians? Can you tell us, Anna, what is pharmacogenomics and what type of patients are helped when their physician orders the types of pharmacogenomic clinical testing that your organization offers?
Excellent question, and I am happy to answer that, in a very easy way. So first, let's start off by replacing using the word pharmacogenomics with PGX. That will make the remainder of this podcast much easier to work through. So PGX testing, quite simply, is a genetic test that utilizes DNA most often collected from a patient's cheek swab. So it's a non-invasive test. When the sample is sent to the laboratory, we look for mutations in genes that are related to drug metabolism or other molecules that affect medication's efficacy. So the doctors often utilize this test to help optimize a patient's medications. So the test will be ordered quite frequently for patients who are not achieving maximum efficacy from their medications, or they're experiencing adverse side effects, or, maybe they're just taking too many medications and they need to streamline and understand, which ones or which doses of the medications are best for them based on their genetics.
That's fascinating information, and you certainly made it very easy for me to understand. Thank you so much. So, we understand that Genemarkers' technical assessment was recently accepted, which is a really significant achievement. Technical assessments are required for molecular assays that are laboratory-developed tests. In order for you to receive a favorable review result, the assay must demonstrate clinical utility, fulfill the CMS reasonable and necessary criteria, and meet analytical and clinical validity standards. The intent of the program is to ensure that beneficiaries are receiving services that are of clinical value, and if these are services which are covered by a Medicare national coverage determination or a local coverage determination policy, that you meet the requirements. During the technical assessment process, Anna, I understand that laboratories must suspend submitting claims to Medicare. So how long did that process take? Is there a value to the TA process for a lab beyond its clearing the way for Medicare reimbursement?
That's a really good question. Or there are several questions, built into this one topic. And, I guess I will start with, nobody likes to go through the technical assessment process. It's labor intensive. And while you're going through it, you're just really frustrated. It's long and it's, very labor intensive. It took us about a year and a half from our initial submission to our, final acceptance of our technical assessment. And within that year and a half, we had 2 resubmissions. So we had to go back and perform an intended use study. And then we needed to, on our second go round, needed to perform an orthogonal confirmation type of testing and before we received our final acceptance of our TA. So, of course, while we were going through this year and a half lengthy process, we didn't appreciate it. However, kind of looking at it now in retrospect, I think it was a really good experience, and it allowed us to really analyze our processes and our procedures, and, not just our lab procedures, but things like medical billing and sales and marketing. And, I think we really were able to refine our procedures. And I think, like any audit, there's always a little bit of uncertainty about what to expect. But I think that this process was is a learning experience. we learned a lot, and moving forward, I think, we feel like we have a really good understanding of what types of tests or what Medicare is looking for in terms of medical necessity and clinical validations. So if we were to move forward with developing another test, we feel like, really confident that we have a good understanding of what that process might look like.
And if you don't mind, Robyn, I'd like to interject that achieving that technical assessment approval is a significant achievement. Suspending billing Medicare, really, you're not supposed to bill Medicare for the assays that are covered by the TA process without achieving the TA. However, there's a lot of, as you know, in the world of compliance, a lot of rumors circulate around that there's a way around this, there's a way around that. We'll just go ahead and use this undefined code to bill it in the meantime. Those are all not acceptable solutions, and obviously Genemarkers knew that was the case, and when they pursued it, but it is a lengthy process that we can understand why folks would be looking for a way around it, but no way around it.
Thanks so much, Regina. Spoken like a compliance professional and a lab professional. Thank you so much. Anna, when Regina reached out to ask if you'd be willing to guest star in this podcast focusing on the importance of revenue integrity and compliance in independent labs, you were very enthusiastic and rapid in your response, yes. So thank you so much for doing that. And, as many labs struggle to navigate the complexities, or as they view compliance activities as something that perhaps interferes with their revenue stream or their clinical mission, can you describe how compliance factors into the culture at Genemarkers and how it impacts your business plan and your day-to-day operations?
Absolutely. And that's a really great question, Robyn. So I guess I will start with compliance is really embedded into the culture and the mission of Genemarkers. Our entire value proposition is based on quality, integrity, and compassion. So, those three things are the base serve as the basic framework or like tenets of the entire organization. And, compliance is a big component of quality and integrity for sure. So our day-to-day operations are guided by processes and procedures that are all, governed by regulatory compliance or regulatory guidelines. So, we've got SOPs in the lab, we've got regulatory or, policies and procedures that guide our client services team, our sales and marketing team, our billing department. All of the, everyone works under the guise of different types of documentation and policies and procedures that are based on, regulations.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm getting like a visual of a Venn diagram in terms of clinical excellence, clinical quality improvement, and compliance. It sounds like it's a great marriage of all of those factors at your organization.
Yeah, Robyn, I'd like to build on that. Is when as a clinical provider, and this is, I don't know if it's whether I've become more seasoned or just I get older and less patient with long explanations. I sometimes offer to whether it's an independent lab or a medical practice or a hospital client, focus on the quality and doing the right thing, and the compliance will naturally follow with that. And, the revenue stream and clinical mission are really important. Pay attention. You've got it. If you don't have revenue, you're not going to achieve your mission. We talk about that all the time. But, sometimes I think that particularly privately owned independent labs, some of them do get off track looking at that opportunity or that revenue stream. And it's just, if you just go back to quality and the clinical mission, it really will keep it as your North Star.
One of the things that, guides us as a company too, I mentioned compassion, and, we always have to remember that there's a patient at the end of every test. And, that also helps us drive, our objectives for delivering quality, making sure our results are accurate, and also making sure that our billing policies are transparent and, compliant and fair.
Thank you. Regina, you're a seasoned compliance professional. You've had clinical experience for years in laboratory services. And I'm wondering, as you've sort of shared a little bit about your observations of working with clinicians and facilities, are there particular challenges that you've identified that perhaps a new compliance officer might face in the independent laboratory industry?
You bet, Robyn. So firstly, the premise of your question assumes that the independent lab actually has a dedicated compliance officer or function. And while this is a completely valid assumption for especially the larger national labs like your Quest and your LabCorps of the world, many specialty labs, especially those in the startup phases, they lack the resources or may not prioritize the resources they have to hire a professional compliance officer. Just like any independent medical practice or physician would simply be the same analogy. In laboratories like that, typically maybe a lab manager or director that's on the clinical side will put on the compliance hat, or someone in the billing or administrative functions may take the title in addition to their other duties. I call that compliance as a side hustle, and it's okay. Often the lab engages a compliance consultant like me or us at BerryDunn on an ad hoc basis to advise and support the function. There is nothing wrong per se with any of these approaches. A compliance program should be scaled to the lab's risks and resources, but it's important that they have a plan. A new or even a seasoned healthcare compliance professional without lab experience has a few immediate to-dos when joining an independent laboratory. That includes something that may be unexpected for some compliance professionals who like to stay a little bit removed from the operations. They need to get up to speed on the array of tests offered by the lab that they're serving, and at least at a high level, the different methodologies that the lab uses to perform those tests. That's because payer policies, including Medicare LCDs or OIG guidance, they're developed around tests, panels, and methodologies. By way of example, the compliance risk profile for the laboratory can change substantially if the government program integrity efforts shift toward or away from a particular service or methodology. We saw this happen in recent years with the scrutiny on those lab-developed panel sizes relative to services such as definitive urine drug testing, as well as genetic testing. So now it's my turn to give Anna a question. So, Anna, I know from our work together, Genemarkers frequently navigates questions from your referring providers and physicians regarding differences in the documentation requirements or patient billing policies that Genemarkers has as opposed to other laboratories that may offer similar PGX services. How does your team navigate those type of questions from your physician partners? I'm thinking of instances of labs that are known to waive patient cost sharing or discount policies, or even whether the ordering provider has to sign the requisition. Those are all things that seem to come up, especially when you and the sales folks of a lab interact with referring providers.
Yeah, that's absolutely an ongoing challenge that my team has, like as you mentioned, particularly the sales and marketing team that are out in the field competing with other labs. And, we try really hard not to talk to the practices of other labs, but instead focus on our approach and our mission. And that is to provide, services that are compliant. So, like we've mentioned, we feel really confident in our policies and our procedures, and, just communicating that consistently to, all of the providers that we work with is, the only way to really navigate that. And, sometimes we win and sometimes we lose, but, like if we're losing an account due for those reasons, maybe it's not the best partner for us.
I think that's a more of a far-sighted approach. I thought of when you shared with me recently that, your team will reach out to the patient to confirm their cost sharing and have that discussion and see if they qualify for any kind of discount policy, and just that extra touch where the patient doesn't get a surprise bill right then and there. That shows a culture of compliance, because it's doing the right thing. So, speaking of that, that cost sharing and that billing piece that nobody likes to talk about, as we know, most independent laboratories, including the really large ones, as well as smaller specialty, outsource a good number of their billing and coding functions to some degree or another. You recently shared with me in a conversation that Genemarkers is working to bring billing back in-house. What factors would influence Genemarkers to take a different path than other labs?
That's an excellent question, Regina. And we've been offering PGX testing for just about 10 years now. And over the last 10 years, we've outsourced billing, we've brought it back in-house, we've outsourced it again, and now we're at the point where we are transitioning to bring our billing back in-house. And, really the primary driver for that is transparency and compliance. We're at the point where we feel like we need to have a little more control over what's being said to the patient. And, as you mentioned, we've recently put what we feel is a really nice workflow into practice with respect to billing for PGX tests, where after the test is sent into our lab, we will verify with the patient's insurance if it will be covered or not. And if it's not covered, we will call the patient and discuss this with them, and also discuss what options they have for billing. And then, move forward with the test or not based on the patient's wishes. So, this is a practice that we put into place. And by having a third party biller kind of, try to intersect or weave into this process, just felt like it was adding a lot of complexity. And, we felt like we really weren't sure that, our messaging would be translated. And, after going through this process where our client services team was doing would be doing an excellent job talking to the patient and, building this rapport, really, we didn't want there to be, any miscommunication between what transpired and what the billing company would then be sending out. So, having a couple of misses on that, made us really reevaluate our opportunity to bring things back in-house. And, I think we have a really excellent medical billing expert on our team. And, I think without that expertise in-house, it would be, a non-starter. But, having that, there builds a lot of confidence to, build a team internally the way we want.
That sounds, that's really refreshing to hear. But it sounds like, again, it's not just about the quality. You've got the patient service element, and you don't want that great service you give up front to call the patient about their coverage to be kind of undermined on the back end by what happens at the billing company. I'll just also add, because I can't help myself with what I do, it is not an effective argument in an audit from a RAC or a CERT or from the OIG to say my billing company did it. Because every claim that goes out, the organization is still responsible for the codes that went out on the claim, even if you have a third-party billing company. So there's a lot to be said for developing that expertise in-house. So I know I personally appreciate that move that Genemarkers is making. But yeah, so Robyn, any other questions for us?
Sure, absolutely. As we're wrapping up our conversation today, I would like to invite Anna and Regina to offer our listeners maybe your top 2 recommendations for promoting a culture of compliance and revenue integrity within a clinical laboratory setting. So Anna, maybe you have some recommendations that you'd like to either put forward or reaffirm based on your prior comments.
Absolutely. And I actually have 3, if that's okay.
Oh, please.
Absolutely.
Okay. I thought about this and I'm like, I have three top comments that I'd like to, close with. And one is, starting a laboratory testing endeavor, going into this, you have to know that compliance is going to require a significant investment in time, human resources, as well as cash. It's going to take an investment. The second thing is that whatever it's very important to have everybody on the team invested in quality and compliance. So if everybody is not really, but doesn't, everybody needs to, in a company, needs to buy in to that value proposition or that mission. Like we say here internally at Genemarkers, in order for things to really, flourish and for us to be successful as a company, everybody in the boat needs to be rowing in the right direction. And, that's certainly true of, laboratory testing and, compliance. And then the third thing I will add, is sort of a hats off to Regina and BerryDunn and, all of our advisors. And, especially for a small company that, like Regina had mentioned, we don't have a dedicated compliance officer. We're a small independent lab, and we rely a lot on expert advice to help, bridge that gap and fill the knowledge base that, we don't have internally. Knowing that experts like Regina are just a phone call or an email away is very comforting and helps us maintain our compliance.
Thanks very much. And Regina, do you have 2 or do you have 3? Go for it, my friend.
Well, I'm going to violate the rules, which is shocking. First, I want to thank Anna for those kind words. And I'll reiterate, I know I said it before, can't help but have a special place in my professional practice for laboratories because I worked in a laboratory, but laboratory folks do make the best compliance officers ultimately. Sorry, Robyn Hoffmann. But my top recommendations, are it's never too late to start. If you are an entrepreneur that has started a specialty laboratory, a lot of those cropped up during the height of pandemic to serve community needs. It's never too late to pivot if you haven't already invested anything into compliance and to just go ahead and start. That's my first. If you're listening to this and goes, gosh, I probably should have done this 2 years ago. Start now. It's never too late. There's plenty of publicly available resources. And of course, we're always happy to help. My other piece is kind of just goes back, and I'm going to mention you again, Robyn. You have a tagline you use on your articles called "Do the Right Thing." And it really is about doing the right thing in the clinical laboratory. The laboratory discipline is highly regulated, and it takes a kind of dedication to providing quality laboratory tests that are of value to the patients. So if you start with doing the right thing in that regard, just keep doing the right thing. And that's my top 2. There's so many granular things I could put everybody to sleep with, but that's what I have right now.
Well, thank you so much. And for those of you who are listening, Regina and I frequently have a little back and forth because we both came into the compliance professional through clinical pathways. So Regina came in through her service as an MLT. I came in as a community health clinical nurse specialist. So happy to be part of the team. And I loved thinking about, Anna, it sounded almost like you were approaching this as a village, if you will, that, Genemarkers is a village. You all share that vision. You marry quality and compliance. So refreshing to hear. And I would like to thank you both for sharing your insights today. We've reached the conclusion of our discussion about compliance and revenue integrity for independent labs. And on behalf of BerryDunn's Healthcare Practice Group, we would like to thank you for listening to this episode of our Healthcare Insights Compliance plus Ethics equals Integrity podcast. We welcome our listeners' questions and their feedback about the ideas we've discussed in this podcast, and we welcome your suggestions for topics we should consider developing for future episodes. Many thanks.